It was really disheartening to see, obviously, because that could be my mom, my friend, just in the nail salon, just getting their nails done and having such a terrible thing happen to them, even like my grandma and things like that. But I remember I was sitting with my friend who we were planning the march with, and we watched the news and we cried together. It was really upsetting. So, yeah.
When I heard that the woman was stabbed, I actually heard about this before it was on the news because I think it was one of my classmates in band whose relatives own the restaurant there. And so it was one of the coworkers that was the one who got stabbed. And so I heard this and I was like, wow.
Especially since having Asian grandparents, I was always worried whenever they went out on the streets, especially where they lived because it was in the city. And it always just made me very protective of them, what would happen and things like that.
So 2 years ago, in the heat of the pandemic, when anti-Asian sentiment was really like big in the U.S., there was a phase. I wouldn't say it lasted long, maybe about a week, but I was scared. I couldn't feel like I could leave the house. I did have a sort of feeling that, that what if, that really haunts me. And I think what's really important to understand is that this feeling might have been shared by, like hundreds of thousands of Asian Americans around the US. And I mean, it's also awful to think that people who are part of the LGBTQ community or people who are African American feel this way constantly.
I was at a supermarket, and I remember thinking, and maybe it was because of the videos I had seen, like, what if one of these guys around me just doesn't like Asians and decides to take some kind of action? And I remember thinking and looking around, well, these people look normal, but what are they really thinking? And so it does have a stress on people's. There's a mental fatigue that I think comes along with all of this hate.
I do have one cousin whose cousin on the other side was mugged in Chinatown in San Francisco. And nasty things yelled at them. And I read stories about it happening here in San Diego.
For me, the bigger worry was for my parents who are in Dallas. If they're out and they're much older, right? And they're walking around and somebody decides to act out against them, they don't stand a chance.
I was walking down the street with my husband who's white and got spit on in the face, and I think it was very much related to this whole COVID demonization. It's very xenophobic, if you will.
It did remind me of the auto wars. And back when people were blaming Japanese automakers for the slump in the economy, and I remember somebody threw stuff at my mother, and my mother actually started a Japanese cultural center at Foothill College in the Bay Area in Los Altos Hills. They were getting hate calls and threats and vandalism. It's just over cars.
And in the last couple of years, you've seen that rise, and you kind of tie it into the last administration's rhetoric around that, and the rhetoric once COVID came about, focusing on China and calling it names, the China virus, Kung flu, things like that. Coming from the leaders, it wasn't very helpful because it kind of fomented kind of the atmosphere of hate against minorities. And for us Asians, we're affected, by that in kind of a real way. You see basically people getting assaulted, spat on, harassed verbally, those things. And I would like to think that it's starting to reduce in frequency, but I know those kinds of things are still out there, and they still happen. You've seen the recent murders in New York City against Asian Americans, and those just happened within the last 6 months.
There's another aspect to the racism that we feel as Asian women. I think Asian women are sexualized in a way that men aren't. So the racism and the discrimination that we hear on the streets or we're affected by has to also do a lot with them seeing us as these sexual objects. So you talked about the shooting in Atlanta. There was also another aspect of it where people were claiming they were sex workers just because they were Asian, which turned out wasn't true. But there's always this element of Asian women being sexualized in this country. And so the discrimination we face is on top of just the color of our skin, on top of just being South Asian or Korean American or Chinese American. There's also like this fetish that goes along with it.
After the Atlantic Spa shooting, we are certainly shocked, and that's a watershed moment. We realize that we can no longer just be the model minority and stay silent. We need to speak up and stand up, and that's why I, along with several friends, we formed the San Diego chapter of the Organization of Chinese American.
The instances of violence that we have seen against our community, especially our elder individuals, is one that I think for me and others hits really close to home because of the fact of how we show respect and admiration, especially to our elders. Seeing violence perpetuated against them is one that I think is a step above. These are individuals who are helpless in that vein, that they're never going to be in a position to protect themselves, and to see them taken advantage of in that way, especially from a violence standpoint, is one that I think rocks all of us.
Asians are viewed as distinct, dissimilar, foreign, yellow peril, those kinds of very hurtful labels and categorizations of an entire race of people.
But it is alarming, though. The sheer amount of violence that I'm seeing right now is horrendous. It's horrific. And some of those videos I cannot watch. And some of those videos are heartbreaking. And you know, it hurts. It hurts because that can be your grandmother, that can be your mom, that can be your dad, that can be your brother, sister, it's any of us. And it's very somber.
It was a real shock in 2020 when we were dealing with the COVID outbreak, and all of a sudden we noticed this collateral damage consequence. We noticed that we were beginning to hear about hate incidents and hate crimes against our AAPI community. And we were hoping that it was just a blip and that it was something that was unrelated and it's going to go away. But it kept persisting and it became worse and worse. And for us in San Diego, our hate crimes against our API community tripled in a short period of time.
We thoroughly investigate incidences. We will go after those that commit these crimes. And then we've got a district attorney's office that will seek the justice that victims deserve.
We decided to use technology and to establish the first online reporting tool in the whole nation with regard to hate crimes. But then we also included an ability to email and the ability to call a hotline. This low barrier that was provided brought in over 300 reports. When you compare that to the 30 prosecutions we've done, you can see that establishing this low barrier tool produces a lot more reporting. And the key to this, in order to build trust with the community and to make sure that the voices are heard, that there's empowerment, that people know their voice matters, and that that report was important to us, they get a call back within 24 hours.
When I heard those speeches in the early days, when our own presidents called it the China virus, the Chinese virus, and the Kung flu, I was already predicting that this was going to happen, because he was putting a face on this tragedy and this scary situation that we're all enduring. And that's no different than, let's say, putting a face on the enemy during World War II. Or when, during Chinese exclusion, when government entities put a face on these monster immigrants who are coming here to take your jobs, do bad things, etc. This fear that it creates in these times of tension and strife. So then, sure enough, as predicted, all of a sudden, Asians are completely innocent people are getting attacked and somehow blamed for a disease that started in an entirely different country, a world away. And so it just reiterates the fact that Asian Americans are forever foreign, always seem to be an intruder, always seem to be representing something that is un-American and against what America is. And if anything, it just reiterates that we have a lot of work to do when it comes to truly upholding the beliefs that America was built on, that all men are created equal. And you would hope that it would go away, but it doesn't seem to have been. It's like once this hate has been let out, it continues on. And it's a bad and horrible statement about the ignorance of this country.
Well, the history of hate in our country, unfortunately, is deep, and it stems back more than 150 years.
With racism in this country, and it's not just against Asian Americans, it's against all people who don't look like the majority.
White Europeans came over, to America, but they did not discover America. I mean, there were a bunch of people that were here before them, well before them, that occupied this country.
I want the younger generations to really think about our DNA, where we come from, And if we remember what that is, then you will be not what we bought into as the model minority, as the person who is silent, as the people who doesn't say or do anything, not proactive. These are all myths.
This is the time for us to really lift up our voices and lift up those voices who haven't felt that kind of power. It's like, we're here to lend it. We're here to give it. We're here to loan it. We're here to say, you've always had it.
And in some ways, it's a blessing to have these numbers, the 11,500, not a blessing that they occurred, but a blessing that all of this is happening so that we are documenting it and we can say there is no question that this is happening. So what are we going to do about it?
There's so many of the youth and so many persons who don't know how to use social media. They're just learning how to use their phones and filming it, even though they can't say anything, just to say, stop is enough.
There's two things that we can do. One is to meet with leadership in the other communities and talk to them about what their needs are and and how we can help them.
This kind of history, our Asian American history, a collective Asian American history, is just not taught in the schools.
She said, yeah. She specifically said, if you want to change people's minds, you get them when they're developing their minds, like when they're in high school.
The other thing is, I think we need to be willing to be the infantry. We need to put boots on and we need to go to their events or go to work in those communities, and we just need to be present.
Really, it's about finding the common thread. We just want to love. We just want to live in peace. We just want to be seen.
Being an American is not a color or a race, or it's nothing more than an attitude. You know, you accept the principles of this country. You work hard, you abide by the law. You support your country, and you're entitled to the American dream.
Thank you.